Hello and welcome to the first episode of the Scrum here on the MMA Today Podcast Network. The Scrum is a podcast where we will bring in the best journalists from the world of MMA to discuss the issues of the day with our esteemed panel of MMA Today writers. Our panel today is founder and editor-in-chief of MMA Today, Tony Fagnano, senior writer and editor, Nolan King, and finally, writer and editor, Max Freedman. I am your host, John Franklin. I'm also a writer for MMA Today. Okay, now that we're done with the introductions, and if I've given anybody any demotions or promotions, either congratulations or I apologize. Let's get to the topics. Topic number one, Leslie Smith was scheduled to fight Aspen Ladd on UFC Fight Night, Barbosa versus Lee. That fight never happened because Ladd missed weight by 1.8 pounds. She claimed certain female circumstances kept her from being able to cut weight, whatever the hell that means. Smith was fine with the catch weight. If the UFC extended her expiring contract, the UFC said, no, we're good, and then proceeded to give Smith three things: her show money, her win money, and her walking papers. The plot thickens, however, when you take into account Smith's activism on behalf of fighters and her connection to Project Spearhead and other labor initiatives. Let's start with Tony. Tony, make sense of all this nonsense. What is the UFC doing here?
I obviously I think it's a shitty thing, but it's the smart thing for the UFC to do. I mean, you have to. If I was in the UFC shoes, this is your best outcome. Basically, you don't have her fight, so there's no chance of her winning. Because there's no fight. And instead of having to go through the whole issue of if she beats Aspen Ladd, she's on what is it? She's 3-4 in the UFC at that point, or 2-3.
Yeah, I think so. Hold on.
She has a pretty good. Basically, she'll be in the rank. She'll be in the top 10 of the rankings if she wasn't already. She'll be one of the top bantamweights and whatnot. And then if the UFC doesn't bring her back after that, that looks horrible because it looks like you're just doing it because of Project Spearhead. But instead, she doesn't fight. There's no fight there at all. They just basically pay her severance payment to get rid of her. And this is honestly the best outcome for the UFC. It's pretty fucking shady, I gotta say. But it is what it is. And I think, I wish Leslie Smith the best. I don't think her legal stuff is really going to work out. There's not a whole lot in her corner, but I think Project Spearhead can still go ahead without her. There's a lot of fighters that signed on to this thing, so it's not completely dead yet. There's still hope.
Nolan, you can't do what you do without having a ton of connections and talking to a ton of people. What has the reaction been out there? And if you haven't heard anything, what type of message do you think this sends to the rest of the roster?
I haven't heard anything too specific, but I think that the message that it sends is, like Tone said, it was the smart thing for the UFC to do, but it also shows they're not afraid to push back against, Project Spearhead a little bit. I think that, we're going to start to – once they get more and more signatures and they hit their goal, maybe we'll start to see some more fighters come out and publicly state that they've joined Project Spearhead. But right now it seems like a lot of them are, remaining quiet. You have their board members like Cajun Johnson and Ali Aquinta that came out and said that they joined. But I think the fact that it's kind of kept under wraps is a good thing and a bad thing. I think, having the names kept under wraps, obviously, like you have to be anonymous with these type of things. You don't want fighters to be afraid to join. But at the same time, when you don't have the bigger names coming out and saying things, like plugging the Project Spearhead, I think it might make other fighters feel like it's kind of a losing battle to fight. Like looking at Leslie Smith, she was the leader of this whole thing and she got axed. So, why should I join? Why should I put myself, why should I risk it? This fighter did a really good job of trying to, push Project Spearhead as much as she could. And she still got, the loose end of like the wrong end of the deal. So, I haven't heard anything too much about it from fighters. I think a lot of them don't really want to come out and say anything publicly about it. We've seen some fighters tweet about it too. I know like Justin Ledet came out and was very vocal about joining. So maybe we'll start to see that more and more, but I think it definitely it shows that the UFC is not really afraid of Project Spearhead, and they kind of honestly just brushing her off and brushing them off.
Max, we'll finish up with you. Where does Leslie go from here? I mean, does she have an in-cage future? Is she destined to be Kurt Flood of MMA, or Colin Kaepernick, someone that sort of falls on a sword and then loses their career because of it? Or what's next for her? Where do you think she should go from here?
Well, I love that you just made a Kurt Flood reference, being a huge St. Louis Cardinals guy. That was tremendous right there. But where she goes from here, she has a big enough name. I think she can latch on with any organization. What I was a little surprised about is it seemed that she never really comes out directly against the UFC in her activism. She's more about the sport in general. And I kind of went back and looked more over it prior to this show. Whereas a guy like K-Jan Johnson, ever since the 2017 Reebok Athlete Summit, he's very vocal specifically about the UFC. And they're very much booking him to try to get him out of there too. I mean, matched him up against Adriano Martins, who's had knockouts in the UFC, Rustam Khabilov, 5-fight win streak. Now Islam Makhachev coming up, 3-fight win streak there. UFC is not afraid to push around and push back on some of these more active athletes that are publicly stating things that they don't believe in with the UFC. But Leslie Smith, she's really turned it around. Ever since that fight against Cyborg, I believe she's won 2 in a row, 2 or 3 in a row, and really is putting her striking together nicely. And there's not as much women's bantamweight action out there, but she'll find something. She's still very much has plenty of fights left, and someone's going to pay her to kind of fight in their cage.
Absolutely, and just as do a little housekeeping, she's 4-3 in the UFC, and she's won her last 2. So yeah, there's definitely, she's a good fighter, and there's going to be potentially more for out there. But like you guys said, the UFC is going to do what the UFC does. They're going to do the thing that maybe hurt them a little bit with the public until someone stops them, until there's legislation, or until something comes down that's going to really hugely change the way they operate business. Okay, topic number 2. In the past few weeks, news has come out, thanks in part to our own Nolan King, that both former Dallas Cowboys defensive end Greg Hardy and former World Series of Fighting fighter Nick Newell are both going to get their shot at the UFC through Dana White Tuesday Night Contender Series. Nolan, let's start with you since your fingerprints are all over this reporting. Should Nick Newell and Greg Hardy have the same path to the UFC?
That's an interesting way to put it. I think that Greg, when I heard the news about Greg Hardy originally, it was probably a week before I put it out there that I knew about it. And I was kind of interested to see what the public perception would be, just because, we see in other sports like the NFL, he got suspended, but he was still allowed to, have a career after that if he so chose to, if teams allowed him to be on their team. So, it was interesting for me to be able to kind of predict how people were going to react to this news. Would they, we've had instances like this in the past, and, domestic violence and things like that. Usually when the UFC signs a fighter on their roster goes, and has these type of issues, we see the backlash from it, but it doesn't stop them from doing it. It brings up the argument, you can get into this whole idea of, should somebody that makes a mistake or does something bad, should that be the end of their ability to make a living? I don't know what the answer is. I'm not trying to get into that too much. But I think, if he goes on there and he wins, he gets a knockout, I see some people saying like, oh, they're not going to sign him. Like if he gets a knockout, they're 100% going to sign him. Like, and it's interesting that you put it, you throw Nick Newell's name out there too, because it's 2 completely opposite guys, and they come from completely opposite, backgrounds, and one of them everybody's pulling for to get in the UFC, and the other one everybody's pushing against to get in the UFC. But if you're going off of their talent, I think that this is a perfect opportunity for both of them. I think that, there's a lot of people out there that are saying Newell should be in the UFC. Like, it's an outrage that he's not. And I honestly think this is the best case scenario for him. I think, there are a lot of guys out there. Like, Nick is good enough to be in the UFC, but there are a lot of guys out there that aren't in the UFC that are good enough to be in the UFC, even in the regionals. So I don't think, the threshold of the UFC roster, he's above the worst guy in the lightweight division by far. So, he could be in the UFC. So this puts a stamp on it. They're going to give him somebody else that is on the verge of a contract. Let him put an exclamation point on it. If he's good enough to be in the UFC, let him prove it in Contender Series. I think both of them, if you're going off of talent strictly, I think they're both, this is the level that they should be at, to prove themselves.
Tony, my question for you is a lot easier. This is a ratings grab for the UFC, right? I mean, that's it. All that, or no?
Is Greg Hardy the fighter himself all that, or what? more.
Well, no, I mean, what I said by all that was he was played for America's team. All that sort of stuff.
Well, the interesting part is the rumors, which I think Nolan could confirm about Contender Series possibly heading to ESPN, and we know ESPN. Nolan wants to chime in.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that like I've talked to multiple like fighters and camps and managers that have been contacted about Contender Series or have teammates on Contender Series or on Contender Series. And 3 or 4 of them have confirmed with me that I asked that the UFC or the powers that be have mentioned that there's a strong possibility that this ends up on ESPN. And that would be the debut episode, which is where I think you're going with Tone, Greg Hardy's episode.
Yep, exactly. Okay, so you got that. ESPN doesn't want any part of Tough. They want Contender Series. We talked about that on the the first Tough Guys podcast, John Franklin.
Mm-hmm. We sure did.
If you haven't heard that. But yeah, so we know what ESPN is all about. They play NFL coverage 24/7, year round. It's just nonstop. It could be the middle of the NBA finals, and they're still talking about the NFL. They don't give a shit. Like ESPN is NFL all the time. Greg Hardy, Cowboys, defensive end, I believe. Guy ESPN probably has highlight packages of him, sacking guys, highlight reel plays they could play before he comes on to fight. And it's gonna be a big thing if that's how it all shakes out. And it makes a lot more sense as to why ESPN wants this entity. And to get someone even like Nick Newell, I hate to bring it up, but I mean, it's like they can really sell the fact that he's disabled, basically. You saw the coverage of the NFL guy that just got drafted. I mean, they talked about him more than they did a lot of the other guys that were drafted, just because of the fact that he had to battle through adversity, only having the one hand. So it really plays into ESPN's hand, I think. And as far as, Greg Hardy being on Contender Series, I was honestly surprised. I've been surprised by his whole career path. I mean, the guy has been training at American Top Team, obviously, and he is an insane athlete that the likes the UFC has probably never seen. And besides John Jones, I should say. John Jones, obviously up there. But so he's been training at AT&T. He's had 3 fights, but they were all amateur fights, which made no sense to me because even at the pro level, you can find guys that just aren't very good, and he should be able to steamroll with his athletic ability. So he's fighting 3 amateur fights, and his first pro fight is going to be on the Contenders Series. That's a little weird. So we'll see how that all shakes out. They didn't really give him the toughest opponent here. No offense to Sales, but we'll definitely see. And it will be interesting. I'll definitely be interested in the ESPN angle.
It's interesting you say that too, because you can really just see basically the shoulder programming that's going to come out of this. Like you said, Greg Hardy, they'll be mentioning on NFL Live and all the NFL coverage. Nick Newell goes right into E60 or something like that, where they're sort of doing the human interest angle. So it makes a lot of sense. So Max, kind of tighten this up for us in terms of what should have been their path. I mean, Nolan touched on it a little bit. Tony did as well. Should Nick Newell have been here just on his own ability? Should Greg Hardy not be in the UFC at all or not have a chance? Like, I hate to have you be the last guy and be the one that's on the spot here, but what do you think their path should have been?
Yeah, it's coming for, as far as the Hardy situation goes, it seems like it's falling under this category of the unofficial code of conduct in the UFC, where sometimes they're more enforcing of certain violations or fouls, and sometimes they're not. Dana strategically, more often than not, has been about second chances. Thiago Silva, Jesse Taylor, to name a few. And the fact that Greg Hardy has this massive money-making opportunity for ESPN Plus or UFC Fight Pass, wherever the fight may be aired, the opportunity there seems to be more than the backlash they'll get from having someone who's had that kind of record fight in their organization. Nick Newell, I don't know what to make of it. Dana's never been high on Nick Newell as far as just having someone with his disability in the UFC. And I think the Contender Series is a nice, happy compromise rather than just giving him an opportunity. But the guy deserves it. I mean, look at his record, look at his performances, look at who he's beaten. If you're asking me, he should be in the big show as it is. But the Contender Series is a happy compromise, and if you see that Nick Newell gets the job done on such a big platform with an impressive performance, how is the UFC not going to award him a contract on the spot?
Could I give like a super hot take right now?
Sure, let's do it.
I think Nick Newell is more risky for the UFC than Greg Hardy, because if he gets KO'd like he did versus Gaethje with the big right hand, and he doesn't have that left to protect himself, and that gets replayed, on the internet, and that goes viral, that's a really bad look PR wise. I mean, to have a disabled fighter with, and obviously, he's trained for this. It's something he's obviously prepared for, but it's a total possibility that something like that happens. It goes viral. It goes on, with all the highlight shows or whatever. It's like, hey, UFC had this one-handed guy get knocked out, by a punch he basically wasn't able to defend because he's disabled.
No, absolutely. And I mean, you don't when you have a video like that, you don't have the opportunity to give context. So if I'm at the gym and CNN shows that video, there's no one there to say, oh, by the way, this guy's fought 16 times. And this is the first time that, you're absolutely right. So it was a hot take in name only, Tony. It was a very accurate take. All right, topic number 3. These two stories really say a lot about where the UFC is right now, chasing ratings and labor issues looming. It has been a little less than 2 years since the Fertittas made history, turning a $2 million investment into a $4 billion windfall. Tony, let's get back to you. Let's assess the state of the UFC. What the hell's going on with this promotion? Are we seeing the seeds of a good long-term plan, or the beginning of the fall of Rome?
I just think, rating, and we could get into, obviously we're going to talk about Bellator later, but I mean, the ratings are down everywhere. Like UFC shows, Bellator shows, everything is just down. The only one that's flourishing, weirdly enough, is Combate Americas, which is like a Mexican promotion. And they're like beating Bellator now in ratings, apparently. So that's a little funny. But we'll have to see if Fedor and Mir, pulled back the ratings comeback. The UFC, I think, the leaked report, which we have no idea if it's true or not. It came from a dubious source. But if they're gonna cut back on shows, like the report said, I really think that's the best angle to boost the ratings back up, even though you're going to lose shows, and the volume's going to be down. But you need those breaks to build hype. You just can't have a show every weekend and expect there not to be viewer fatigue. And I think that's what we're seeing at this point. And then you add in, losing basically all your stars and them not really organically creating many. It's a problem. It's not the fall of Rome. The UFC, I'm sure they always find somebody, to carry that mantle, of superstar, and, barring some craziness, I don't think they'll be bought out or die off anytime soon.
Well, I think the Combate Americas example was a good one, because what the UFC typically does is they'll let someone build a market for them, and then they'll just buy them, or they'll let someone build their stars. So I could see Combate America potentially being bought out at some point. One FC, like they have these regional things where it's like these guys are doing all the legwork, and then the UFC just swoops in with a fat paycheck or a fat checkbook and take. And that seems to be a way to kind of keep perpetuate.
That's a good point. Yeah, and the UFC going into Chile. That actually makes a lot of sense. Obviously, with Univision and other partnerships that Combate Americas has, they've built, that solid Latino viewer base that I think the UFC has really coveted, because they went after I'm butchering his name, Yair Rodriguez, Alexa Grasso. They really want a Mexican superstar. They had one in Kane. He's been so injured, and he's been really on or off, but they want more Mexican talent. And traveling down to Chile, DC Howard, one of our writers, thank God he's back. Great to see him back. And he kind of dove into a little bit. Apparently, Chile is one of the more affluent nations in Southern America, so that seems to be a strategic thing for the UFC. Headed to Chile, UFC Santiago coming up.
Max, let's go over to you. Obviously, the Fertitas built an amazing product, but do you think they pulled a fast one on WME IMG on this one, where they kind of, I mean, it's well documented that they stacked the year they were selling. The cards were all stacked, and it was all lined up. They caught some great fortune. But do you think WME IMG really knew what they were getting?
Probably not, to be honest. And I think that's shown by their approach to what seems to be more of a, how are we going to get our $4.2 billion ROI back as quickly as possible, by stacking the deck more with, some bringing in some of these stars, like a, marketing guy like CM Punk, or bringing in Greg Hardy on the Contender Series, just immediately looking for ways in money-making opportunities more than ever before.
So this is why that Max is a stud, because he 100% led me right into my question for Nolan. So Nolan, what do you think the future holds for the UFC? Who's going to make this company worth the $4 billion they paid? The Greg Hardys and CM Punks, the Demetrius Johnsons and Tyrone Woodleys, the Sage Northcutts and Paige Van Zants, or like Obi-Wan Kenobi? Is Conor McGregor our only hope?
I don't know, man. There's nobody that really sticks out to me that will get on that level of like the McGregor, the Jones, the Rousey, that type of a draw. But I can tell you, to go back to Tone's original statement where the oversaturation is killer. I think in general, like just the state of MMA, it's not even just the UFC. Like Bellator is hurting because there's so many UFC shows. Like all these regional shows, like LFA's on every week now. Like there's just so much MMA. Even me, who like watches it as much as I can, like it can get tiring. When there's 6 cards on at the same time all over the world, it's just hard for, it's hard for anybody to keep up with that. So I think, in my opinion, the UFC, even if they cut back 6 shows a year, it would make a huge difference. And I think that the thing that's going to get them by for now, it's not in the form of a person. I think it's going to be in the form of like super cards, like look at 225. That's an awesome card. That's going to have eyeballs on it. 226, same thing. They need to, to move more towards that and move away from, the 224 card that we have next month. Like, that's not going to draw. If they stack those cards for the time being, keep people's interest. I have friends that don't watch MMA that much, but they tune in once in a while, and that's where I gauge my a lot of my opinions on. And those people brought up these cards to me. The one with CM Punk on it, sure, like he's a draw, but he also brings eyeballs to Robert Whittaker and Yoel Romero. 226, people are buzzing about that card. Those are the type of cards that the UFC needs to continue to put on to show why they're the greatest promotion in the world, why they have the biggest talent pool in the world with supposedly the best fighters. So hopefully they can move away from, trying to have a show every week and move more towards, putting on big shows until that next star comes through. Those are the type of shows that are going to promote those next big stars.
Yeah, I agree. I think they overextended themselves. Obviously, they have a huge roster to keep guys from other promotions. Once you have a huge roster, you have to have enough cards to have all those guys be active fighters, and then with injuries and all that, you would think the solution would be less cards, more stacked cards. You could pay, you could figure out the financials of, instead of paying, X amount of dollars to have fighters on 2 cards, they're all on the 1 card, then you skip a month or so. I like it just from the perspective of, I like the build up to a fight, and I like having more than 3 days to talk about it before I have to talk about previewing the next fight. I mean, I enjoyed that about the old days of MMA. If I enjoyed anything, it was that you had time to like chop shit up and have an opinion on something and then change it and rethink things. And now it's just like you're on to the next so quickly. All right, topic number 4. Last night, Bellator Fighting held its 198th numbered event, the main event, which was Fedor Emelianenko versus Frank Mir. The card had a main event full of finishes, and it was received well by both those in attendance and on social media. Also, a shameless plug if you want to hear more in-depth analysis of this card in Bellator, listen to the Bellator show, which will be this week, hosted by myself and Max Freedman. So, Max, let's start with you. You were in attendance last night at the Allstate Arena in Chicago. You can tell me what you heard from fans or other journalists, but I'd like to get your thoughts as well about, do you think this heavyweight Grand Prix tournament has been a success so far?
So I think it has, and I think it hasn't for a few different reasons. Yes, it's gotten a lot of viewers. You got names like Frank Mir, Fedor Emelianenko, Roy Nelson, Matt Mitrione, big names come into the fray. And Vitaly Minakov, their former heavyweight champion, had probably the most unclear situation in MMA. They needed a new heavyweight champion, and what better way to do it than an old school style tournament? No, from perspective that there is absolutely no reason Ryan Bader should be in this tournament. He continues to win at light heavyweight. They're trying to build him as, probably the best light heavyweight outside the UFC. He's had this career resurgence ever since his loss to Anthony Rumble Johnson. The cost of having him lose in this tournament or get knocked out again, to me, it just seems like the cost is too high for that to happen. And having him get matched up against a guy like Matt Mitrione, that could very well happen. So, yes, I think from a viewership standpoint, from an organization standpoint, it's a good way to draw eyes and crown a new champion. No, I don't believe Ryan Bader should be in the tournament, but that's pretty much the only reason why.
Tony, let's move over to you. Who do we need to see in the finals for this tournament to be truly considered a home run, keeping in mind the only fighters left are Sonnen, Emelianenko, Bader, King Mo, Mitrione, and potentially Crow Cop and Roy Nelson, who are kind of being put out there as alternates. But then again, this is a promotion who gave us Dada and Kimbo, so anything's possible.
I mean, Max, how are you going to mention Ryan Bader and not mention Chael Sonnen? He's a middleweight.
He's a middleweight, but Chael Sonnen hasn't been towards the top of the mixed martial arts rankings for years.
No, I know, but it's just I thought that was a little crazy because if anyone's out of place, it's Chael Sonnen. Like, I could not him fighting Fedor and the stare down they did, like, completely blew my mind yesterday that they're even going to be fighting. But to John's point, for this to be a home run for Bellator, they need Fedor to go deep into the tournament, and I think Chael Sonnen's a good matchup for that, honestly. Even coming off of that win over Rampage, and albeit a very diminished and not very motivated looking Rampage. I was there in attendance. The fight was just wonky and just, I don't know, just didn't feel right. But I think Fedor going deep and even getting Crow Cop, if Crow Cop can get in the mix here, that's another, old school legend. I mean, you're basically having a Pride, throwback here. That would be amazing. But honestly, I don't know. I'm not quite sure how the bracket shakes out, but I think I would have Matt Mitrione as the favorite to win the whole thing. And I think they really need Fedor to keep this thing, alive.
Nolan, let's end. I agree. I think Crow Cop's the key to this because Fedor's fought Mitrione. I think he's fought King Mo. I'm not interested in Sonnen. I'm not really interested in him fighting Bader. So Crow Cop kind of figuring out a way to get in there. Someone on Twitter, I wish I could credit them. Someone on Twitter actually came out and said that there's a scenario where, Crow Cop beats Nelson and somebody gets injured, and then, we have the fight that we want. We'll finish up with Nolan. Nolan, what's the state of Bellator? To steal a line from Desus and Miro, how strong is the brand?
I think, last night was a step in the right direction, but when was the last time that we had a show like that where people, all over Twitter and all over social media were talking about Bellator? I'll be interested to see the ratings. I think that they, should, from my indication, should be doing a lot better than they've been doing with last night's show. But I think it's kind of a wake-up call at the same time because I feel like, there's been different peaks in the Coker era where we've had 3 or 4 shows in a row where we're like, okay, Bellator's starting to gain some traction. They're picking up big free agent signings. They did the big show in Madison Square Garden. And then there's other times where they go 6 to 8 shows where, they're 3 of them are on tape delay. Some event gets obliterated. And then the other 3, people just, so a lot of the MMA community doesn't even know that it's happening, so I think they need to be more consistent. I hope that, last night's show is a step in the right direction. Those are the type of, that's the type of luck they need too. I feel like they've had some bad luck with different outcomes and things like that. So, Chael versus Fedor is going to be big for them just in entertainment value wise. I think, that will probably do big numbers. And then, like you said, Crow Cop, if he ended up coming into this tournament somehow and, him and Fedor in the finals or something, that would just, as far as hardcore MMA fans go, that would certainly have a lot of buzz too. So they need a little bit of luck. They need to kind of get themselves back on track and hopefully, they can start hopefully the whole state of MMA can just start, rebounding, because I hate to see any promotions ratings drop as much as Bellator's.
And to answer Nolan about like when was the last time Bellator had a show like this, it was the last time they put on the heavyweight Grand Prix fight, the Rampage Sunning card. I think that did, looking at the numbers right now, it averaged 1.3 million viewers and peaked at 1.5 during the main event. So that was a very successful event, and it's been a lot of bad in between.
And hey, John, Tone,
Yeah.
one last thing to add, just to reiterate, man, they really do need Fedor to go deep in this tournament. As someone that was there last night, there was a good crowd. It was buzzing. Emmanuel Sanchez being from Milwaukee, he got a decent pop. Dylan Dennis got a decent reaction. But when Fedor walked out, they blew the roof off that place. The atmosphere was electric. And when he knocked out Frank Mir, it got even louder. So to show there are definitely hardcore fans that want to see Fedor win this tournament, or at least go to the finals.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. All right, let's move on to topic number 5, which is the PFL. The PFL announced that their season will be kicking off on June 7th with the pot of gold at the end being $1 million purse. Here are the details of the season according to a press release, just in case we're not completely up on it. 2018 PFL season will feature 126 fights in 7 regular season events, a bracket-style winner-go-home playoff, and a $10 million postseason prize pool, the largest tournament prize pool in the history of MMA. The season will begin with 12 athletes in each of 6 different weight classes. 8 fighters from each class will earn their way into the playoff round, and 1 fighter in each division will earn the title of champion. All competitors will have to win 2 fights in one evening during the playoff round to advance to the championship event. 6 fighters will take home a 2018 PFL championship belt and a $1 million purse. Tony, let's start with you. I said a lot there. Let's say this goes exactly how the PFL would want it to, a complete dream scenario. Will it matter?
Will it matter in the sense of, will it be able to compete with
in the long term for the PFL? Will it make it more relevant? Like if this goes as best as it could go for them, will it change the MMA landscape at all?
It's such a novel. I mean, we've never seen anything like this. I mean, the $1 million, and I've said this. I think I tweeted this out before. I mean, the winner of each weight class, and even the runner-up, is going to make more than the average UFC fighter does in their entire career. Like that's a big pot of gold at the end of the rainbow for these guys. I think that's why, even with that, I was still surprised when they released the roster by some of the names on there. I didn't realize that they were going to be able to grab some of these guys. And so I'm actually kind of excited to see how this goes down. As far as it mattering in the long run, I think it's really, like we just talked about with the ratings and everything, I think they're partnered with NBC Sports. Is that who they got? Nolan, maybe?
Yep. And then they'll be streaming their prelims on Facebook, I believe.
Okay, so NBC Sports. I think that obviously the ratings are going to play a huge part as to whether this matters at all. If it can be level with Bellator, then you have another player in the game here. What do you do for a second season, though? You're going to throw out another $1 million, or do you just go with the champions you have and do more of a traditional promotion? I mean, we saw Bellator switch from a tournament, a season tournament style to just, standard MMA promotion like they do now. So that's really, that'll be interesting to see where they go with this. And obviously World Series fighting / PFL has had issues in the past. So we'll see if this even, makes it to a conclusion, or if this ends in a bunch of legal issues.
Max, let's swing over to you. This may be a very insightful question, or maybe the dumbest question I've ever asked. I'll let you be the judge of that. What is the incentive for a fighter to be a part of this? Is it strictly the money? Is that it?
It's strictly the money. That's the $1 million paycheck at the end of the day. I mean, and for what is it, 4 fights? If you're in a 16-man tournament or an 8-man tournament, 4 fights. I mean, that's an average of $250K. And plus, you're getting show. Aren't they getting show and win money for each fight as well? So it's more than that, 100%. I do have a few more choice words about this organization and the tournament, though. But if you got more questions about the actual tournament itself, I want to go to King, and go for it.
Yeah, it just seems like listen, I've covered the World Series of Fighting. I know the guys pretty well that Carlos Silva and Ray Sefo. It just, I don't know if to make something like this happen, do you just find some cowboy with oil money that just wants to say like, hey, I got this much money, I'm going to write this thing off or whatever. He's just looking to invest in something, because I don't see I just don't see the upside. As much as I like those guys and I think they're bright guys, I don't see what the level of investment yields. But if I did, I'd be promoting fights and not talking about them. So, all right, Nolan, we'll finish with you. Is this genius or desperation? What's the future of this promotion?
At first, I usually try to keep my negative opinions to myself, except if somebody asks me. So, when this news first came out, I was like, man, this is going to be a nightmare again. Like WSOF just really, gasping for air at this point. And then they had the 6-month layoff extra where they thought it was going to start at the beginning of this year, and then that didn't happen. So I just kind of dug their grave and was just waiting for them to get in it. But honestly, with the press release and everything and the rosters that they came out with and some of the names they were able to pull, and especially some of the Russian names that we might not know in the U.S., but those guys, a lot of them are really legit and, would be solid fighters in the UFC. So, I think their roster pool is good. I think that the fighters are enthusiastic about it. Like Max said, money is a huge part of it. One of the fighters I was talking to, one of their lightweights, was saying that, he's going to make more money in 2 fights than he would in 2 years in the UFC. So, that's huge. But also I think the fact that it's new kind of, if it was a promotion that was struggling or, was kind of, was around for a period of time and wasn't relaunching, I think there would be less enthusiasm to sign. But this idea that, they supposedly took time off to figure everything out and got all this money, which I don't know, like you said, I have no idea where it's coming from. Hopefully the fighters get to, see the money. There's always that concern, but
yeah,
if they can carry this out, man, I'm interested. It adds a whole new, element into the world of mixed martial arts, something fresh and something new. So I'm for it for now, until something happens where I'm not going to be.
Well, and there has to always be the promotion that keeps it fun, right? I mean, they had the 8-man tournament with the World Series of Fighting. That was a lot of fun. I covered that. So I think that I do wish they would get a little bit more help from the journalism community. Obviously, our job is to write, not to do PR. But I think that a lot of times, and I'll call people out specifically, a lot of guys over at MMA Fighting undercut the World Series of Fighting substantially on Twitter. And, I was there one night and somebody from MMA Fighting was kind of tweeting the one in Garden Grove that was kind of like at a rec center. They were taking these like unflattering pictures of it. And I get it. I mean, it's not an ideal situation to hold or cover a fight, but it was like what was happening in the cage was irrelevant to them. So, I do have a history with these guys. I do like them. I've always thought it was interesting how people somehow separate their criticism of the World Series of Fighting with Ray Sefo. Everybody always seems to like Ray. No one ever calls Ray Sefo out, but they'll shit all over the World Series of Fighting. I'm like, this fucking guy runs it. So you're kind of taking a shot at him too, but they always keep his name out of it because, one, they probably don't want to deal with him, and 2, everyone likes him. But it's weird that they make that disconnection. Okay,
John,
so
as someone who's covered the WSOF or PFL, do you see this tournament going through? Do you think that it's actually going to be completed and there will be a $1 million winner? Because I have a hard time just seeing all the issues that they've had as an organization. And like you said, Ray Sefo, very respectable guy, but you don't really associate him with the success and failures of the organization. Do you see it going all the way through and there's going to be a winner in each division?
It's a tricky question because I think they'll get it started. But I know that towards the end of World Series of Fighting, they had to cancel some cards. So I think that a lot of things have to fall into place. There's a lot of moving parts, Max. That's what scares me. There's a lot of things that have to happen, and a lot of deals that have to be secured. And I don't know if it starts and it's not well received, if there's certain things they're banking on to continue it. And if there's things they're banking on to continue it, like, TV deals or ratings or certain numbers or advertisers, I don't know that they'll be able to hit those metrics. But if they have all the money secured, then of course, obviously, of course. But I don't doubt their ability to get all the money secured. But if they have contingencies, I always worry about the WSOF/PFL with contingencies. Like if certain dominoes have to fall, they don't always fall for them. So, all right, let's finish up with a few things here. We'll go to the flurry. Flurry is going to be just some rapid fire stuff. I'll call on you guys as we go. Real quick, 5 5 flurry topics. Number 1, Bisping versus Diaz. Do we like this fight, and do we think we'll ever see it? Tony?
We're talking about Nate, right? Or Nick?
Nick?
I don't like it. I think Bisping kills him, and it's just sad.
Nolan?
I like it, and I don't think it's ever going to happen.
Max?
Same thing. Like it. Don't think it's going to happen.
Up next, Conor McGregor versus the UFC. In the end, who wins this standoff, Max?
The UFC. Conor, you need to stop talking about it.
Nolan?
You asked me a year ago, I would have said Conor. Now I'm saying UFC.
Tony?
Neither.
All right, that's one way to answer it. Number 3, Ronda Rousey said, hearing me speak is a privilege. Nolan, is she right?
Somewhat. I think it's obnoxiously yes, but also I would never come out and never say something like that. Like, it's just, I don't know.
Tony?
I took it as a big slap in the face to us journalists, honestly. I mean, not to take, get personal or anything, but, I mean, there's plenty of fighters out there. There's plenty of famous people that grant their time. And what makes you so much different that your time is, so valuable and hearing your voice is so special. I'm not buying it. And I just don't like that statement at all.
Max?
This is 100% a setup and a work to build a potential heel turn in WWE.
I like it. Oh, and I'm
a WWE fan.
So listen, I've neglected answering myself. I think we'll see Bisping Diaz. I really want to see it. I think Conor wins. And if we're using the term privilege as something that we never get to do, only in special occasions, then yes, hearing Ronda Rousey speak is definitely a privilege because it's not something we get all the time. So, all right, number 4, DC versus Jones versus Gustafsson. These 3 had some Twitter beef, and the Swede actually gave DC and Bones some common ground. He may be able to broker peace between the 2 of them. What does the next 2 years hold for these 3, and will we ever see any combination of them in a cage together again? Tony?
I do think we see the DC Gustafsson rematch. I think DC beats him again. I think we hopefully see the DC Jones rematch for 3rd time, and I think Jones wins that again.
Max?
Yep, like Tone said, Gustafsson, Daniel Cormier rematch. Gustafsson's really the only light heavyweight in the division right now that stands a chance and could put on a good fight. I mean, their fight in 2016 was a lot closer than people tend to remember. John Jones does not fight in the UFC in the next 2 years.
Nolan?
I'm gonna have a hot take here and say that we see all 3 matchups. I think it will happen eventually. Something good's gonna happen to us, right? One of these matchups we talk about has to happen. So I'm gonna say that DC does fight Gus again. I'm going to say that DC fights Jones one more time, and I'm going to say somewhere down the road that Jones and Gustafsson end up having their rematch.
Okay, number 5 and final topic here in the flurry, Ben Askren versus Roy McDonald. Do we like this fight, and do we think we'll ever see it? Max?
Scott Coker's proven he'll do whatever it takes to put on a good show for the fans and produce money. So if he really sees an opportunity to build a matchup with these 2 and make some money, then yes. The only downside being I don't think he wants Ben Askren as his welterweight champion.
Nolan?
I like the fight, and I think we're going to see it. I can't remember the last time that a promotion openly talked about, putting on a co-promotion fight like this, out in the open and not bounce around. I mean, the Twitter account was tweeting about it the other day. If there's not a possibility, a solid possibility of that fight taking place, then they're not going to start hyping something that they don't think they're going to get involved in.
Tony?
Yeah, Scott Coker is not Dana White. He does not hold grudges. He doesn't do this pity, bullshit. He will totally mend fences with Ben Askren and get him back into the fold, and get at that fight with Roy McDonald. And I personally don't think he would have a problem with him being the champion. He just wants the biggest names and the best fighters, and the best champions. He doesn't, want all this other bullshit that the UFC is trying to do. So I think it happens as long as Askren's realistic. I'm not sure. His contract with ONE was something that was kind of hotly debated, and there was some iffy stuff in there. So I'm really not sure how much he was getting paid, and I'm not sure if Bellator can match that. So, but if he's realistic with his contract demands, and they could definitely get a deal done. And I would love to see this fight, and it just adds to what I think is the best welterweight division in the world.
Again, I didn't answer 4 or 5, so I'll answer them now. I think that Jones is Daniel Cormier's piece of unfinished business. I think Gustafsson is Jones's piece of unfinished business. I think after DC is done with Stipe, depending on how that goes, I don't think he really wants to fight that much longer. He would probably only hold out for Jones. I think he has no interest in fighting Gustafsson again. So I think that we'll see Jones and Gustafsson, maybe Jones and DC. If the money's right, I don't think we'll ever see DC and Gustafsson. And I think that Jones will probably fight Stipe as well. That's really all Jones has left to do. Maybe Kane, maybe Brock. As far as Askren and McDonald go, Askren's a weird kid for me, man. He doesn't seem to need the things that other people need. I think he could retire never having fought on the big stage and really not give a shit about it. So from that perspective, I think that he's only coming to the table if the terms are right. And I don't know that they're going to be able to meet his terms. But like you said, Scott Coker has shown an ability to, Viacom's got deep pockets. So he has an ability to figure out ways to make things happen. All right, finally, let's end this podcast on what I call finish strong. This is our time to advocate for something in MMA or plug what we have going on. And remember, boys, this isn't a soapbox. No shame in plugging your stuff. Make sure you include your Twitter, and we will start with Max.
Oh, I did not see this coming, but I'll definitely plug my Twitter. My handle's at Trademark MMA, spelled out. Looking forward to doing some more of these podcasts with you, John, and as well, always good time talking with Tone and Nolan.
Absolutely. Nolan, go ahead.
You can follow me at MMA_Kings. I have a bunch of interviews that are going to be up on MMA Today this week, and also some pieces coming out from our friends over at Flow Combat.
Tony.
Oh, yeah, sorry. I thought I was muted there for a second, but yeah, definitely at Big Tone MMA. I think something that doesn't get talked about a whole lot, and it's a little off the beaten path. But the work that our Italian friends do at the site is amazing. They do articles in English and Italian, so you can read those in either. And I think they're honestly probably the best source of Italian MMA information out there. So definitely give those guys all a follow. Al Frey, there's a whole team of them. I'll try to tweet them out later today, and follow their coverage. They just got a big win over in Cage Warriors over the weekend. There's an Italian, I believe, lightweight champion now at Cage Warriors. So great stuff over there.
All right, and that concludes the first episode of The Scrum. Make sure you subscribe on iTunes, SoundCloud, and YouTube to our podcast network. Share with your friends. Coming up on the MMA Today Podcast Network, we have the premiere episode of the Bellator show this week, hosted by myself and Max Freedman. Revisionist MMA, hosted by myself, and with special guest, Black Sports Online writer Kel Dansby. Keep it locked to the MMA Podcast Network, and we'll keep bringing you the best podcasts in MMA. See you next time.